Hi, everyone. Thanks for the great presentations. Very motivational, very inspiring. I just wanted to make a quick comment about sort of the importance of not relying on protesting to bring about the changes we want to see. Because I think, participating in rallies and protests are important tools for us to bring attention to many of the issues that plague our society. And they do bring a lot of people together and show tremendous solidarity, but we shouldn't just stop there. Um, if we really want to see drastic changes in the way our society is run, I think we really need to organize and mobilize our forces for that. And this really requires us to engage in organizing efforts before, during, and hopefully not, but possibly after these protests subside. So I think if there's ever a time for us, especially those that are just beginning to become active in some way, to begin to discuss the problems that we are facing and how to overcome them, the time really is right now. And the task at hand right now is getting as many people involved as possible, because we do have the numbers on our side. It's just a matter of getting the majority of people organized for that. Um, and I think we can't just rely on things like police reforms to get results, because that's what some people have been trying to do since 5 years ago, when similar eruptions happened after Mike Brown and others were killed. And look where that's gotten us. Nowhere. We're back to square one, basically. Um, because you can't really reform an institution whose main purpose is to protect the wealthy and powerful and to keep the rest of us in our place. So I think our efforts need to go beyond that, and they really need to go into organizing for the complete replacement of the system of capitalism, which really uses the police to maintain itself and for its own survival. Until then, I think the police will continue to do what they are doing with complete disregard for human life, because that's what they've been trained to do, basically. So that's where I'm at.
Monday's protest. I mean, I think it was a good experience. Uh, a lot of people came out, and I think that shows something about how we're tired. And the protests have been continuing like every day for like the past 2 weeks. So I think that's really outstanding. I think that's like a great sight. People are trying to get engaged. Not everybody knows what to do though, so I don't think protesting is a bad thing or negative at all. I'm not sure about the next steps that we need to do, but I think we do need to continue to organize and do things in the masses. One thing that I was thinking about and getting information on was like defunding the police. I also think we need to start shutting down, like have a mass shutdown of corporations that fund like some of these companies that give a lot of money to the police. Other than we got to look at a lot of people who are running for office, like local government, that the police get, companies that like that um, donate money to those candidates. That and look at who's supported by the police and not elect those people into positions. Mass shutdowns. But it's a systemic problem, and I'm still working on the answer.
It was really inspirational to see that many people out there, to see the diversity in race and age. And I really enjoyed what all of you had to say about, you know, the problems that we have in America right now. And I think that, some things that we can do like right now to change is, put more money into education, put more money into affordable housing, because a lot of these crimes are, usually as a result of that. So I think that, pretty much like how Akil said, just uh, funnel the extensive cash that is given into army and police, and funnel that into things that will actually support the youth and support the people of our future. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who's spoken, especially the last two before me. I was going to comment a little bit on Monday, actually. I'm an activist with Speak Out Now, and but I'm also immunocompromised, and it's been hard for me to decide what to be involved in, but I felt myself unable to avoid going to the last few demonstrations, and I had to be there on Monday. Because it just, everything that's going on, I just knew it was going to be important. And I really want to say that I think what was organized was really impressive. It was so powerful. You could feel the support, not only from the people who were there, as people have mentioned, which was really racially diverse and mixed class. And I think that there were really beautiful signs, creative things people were saying that were really on point. And but it wasn't just the protesters that impressed me and that really impacted me. It was also the fact that on the sidelines there were people coming up all over the place, bringing water, bringing snacks, finding ways to support. And that's really different and really impressive. And especially when I saw a bunch of Kaiser workers who stood outside and cheered us on from the sidelines, because I'm someone who works in healthcare and used to work at Highland Hospital. And when I worked there, I remember Black Lives Matter happening. And I remember most of my coworkers just feeling that were really impacted by what the media said about the protests and really thought that they were just scary, violent things that were happening, and most of my coworkers didn't get involved. They felt sympathetic, and obviously they were in a community that was really impacted and connected to what was happening, but they didn't feel they could be involved. And this shift of seeing Kaiser workers come out and support the demonstrations, I think it means something. And I think that means that we could be in a really different moment. I think that means we could be entering a period that could really shift and change our whole society. And I think the demonstrations already that have happened, that means we're moving on the right track. It means that, we can see the power that we have, and we can see that the lies we've been told by this society and this system, that people are selfish and don't care about one another and don't want to fight for a different world, that those things just aren't true. But I've also, like I said, I was involved in Black Lives Matter. I was involved in Occupy. I was involved in the Oscar Grant protests that happened 10 years ago. And I know I'm too young to have been involved in the civil rights movement or the worker struggles of the 1930s. But I think the fact that all of those things have happened in the past and we're still here says something about what we need to do today.
I don't want to be too repetitive of what other people have said, but I've been active in Oakland for a while, and it was tremendous. It was really amazing. The number of people came out, the diversity, the energy, and I try not to get emotional too often, but I certainly got a little bit emotional as we were marching down to Oscar Grant Plaza. But I think you see, like other people are saying, I think you see the tremendous possibilities, like a lot of people in the newspapers are saying, is we haven't seen these protests for generations, in response to the racism that exists in our society on a day-to-day basis. People are saying the response isn't, or the last time there was a response this big was in, the late 60s. So I think for sure there's a new moment, but I kind of wanted to respond a little bit to what some people were saying about defunding the police and wanting to invest more in Black communities and working class communities. And I think totally we do want to, and all of those things are important and necessary, but they're kind of like complicated political issues, because we don't want to lose sight of, what the problem is at hand. The moment that we've been having now with the past 12 days has been amazing. It's been protests in Berlin and France, and 30 seconds left. Okay, that's super quick. We just have to keep sight of what's the fundamental problem. Why are we still in this predicament, And I just want to leave with a quote actually from Malcolm X. that I think is important for us to think about as we begin to hopefully organize and continue this movement. So he says, you know, if you stick a knife 9 inches into my back and pull it out 3 inches, that is not progress. Even if you pull it out all the way, that is not progress. Progress is healing the wound, and America hasn't even begun to pull out the knife. And so for us as revolutionary socialists, healing the wound is ending capitalism. So I think when we think about our activity and our protests and organizing, we have to keep that in mind.
I'm in Baltimore. I was able to go to one of the protests yesterday and the one today. The one today was inspiring. It was pretty massive. And I've been working in a grocery store during the pandemic, and it's been an interesting perspective to have. But I guess something that's just on my mind with any of these talks is if the end goal is to end capitalism, I wonder about the sort of planning in the form of large-scale codification of plans. Like I'm sort of like I think that there could be more. If the goal is to end capitalism, then there would have to be some amount of plans. Once you have people organized, and I'm interested in hearing what people's thoughts are on sort of concrete plans for large-scale changes that are sort of as well defined as what goes on in the establishment, because I think that's sort of what it would take.
We have heard from healthcare workers, from teachers, from bus drivers and transit workers. But I think in a lot of these spaces, we never hear from sex workers. And as a full service sex worker, I think one of the ways in which we can start to defund the police is to decriminalize sex work. I come from a harm reduction intersectional approach when it comes to dismantling capitalism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness. And I think a lot of the ways, you know, when we say Black Lives Matter, what about my life? I, as a Black neurodivergent sex worker, oftentimes fear the police because of the ways in which I choose consensually to make money under neoliberal capitalism, right? We all have the neoliberal capitalist boot on our neck, but I just choose to do the work that I do because I think it's more ethical, and it allows me to tend to the wounds of not only post-traumatic stress syndrome, but also post-traumatic slave syndrome. So I think if folks are wondering of ways in which that we can, you know, ideas and vehicles in which we can think about defunding the police now, I think we should get our comrades out of prison. And when I look at Baltimore City and who is arrested and who is predominantly in our jails, it's folks who are selling sex and it is folks who are using drugs. So I think collectively, all the folks on this call, wherever you're at, start to be in solidarity with folks who do use drugs, folks who do sell sex, whether it's they feel that their only option is to sell sex and they actually want to leave the life, or if it's folks like myself who, quite frankly, a job is a job under neoliberal capitalism. And until we get to socialism, until we get to communism, sex work is going to be here, and we need to get our comrades out of prison. That's enough for me.
One thing that I kind of get from everything that's been happening is it's somewhat of a replay of the emancipation that happened during the Civil War. You have a group of individuals who want to keep the system as it is, whereas you have people who are recognizing that the system is corrupt, yet they want to change it. And I've been seeing a lot of videos, a lot of portions of these protests to where you have policing officers who are taking the law into their own hands and doing what they see fit due to the fact that the system aligns with their way of thinking. So far with these protests I've been able to go to, I've been able to get organizations' names and try to get their stance on the actual Black Lives Matter agenda. A lot of these organizations that I've come across, they've been very, very cooperative in displaying some of their information and letting me know this is what we want, this is what we need to do. And one thing that I keep on harping back is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You can't tell someone to portray or do a certain manner of lifestyle if they're so worried about what is happening away from their job. So when it pertains to the education of these police officers that they need to have, understood, the education of these police officers, what are they being trained on? What is happening? What are they being influenced to do when they have quotas to meet, if they don't have amounts of certain arrests made? So it kind of feeds into what everybody's saying with the defunding of police officers. Police officers don't really like to listen unless you're aiming for their pockets. So if you have them locally funded versus federally funded, I think it's a lot better for the community.
Two things. Number one, I am 73 years old and have some health problems. And so I've limited myself to demonstrations this week where we could do it in a car caravan. And that has been very frustrating, but it was good to be there when we could be. The other thing about being 73 years old is I'm one of the few people on the call, I think, who had the opportunity to participate in the civil rights movement. And I did participate here in Baltimore in a small way. But I am, what I wanted to share primarily is that when the neighborhood listserv next door that we have, a couple of days ago, we saw a video of a protest demonstration in a neighborhood not far from us. This is a mostly white working class neighborhood that overlaps the Baltimore city line, some in the city, some in the suburbs, generally considered a pretty conservative neighborhood. And there was a demonstration for George Floyd. There were mostly white people lining the street, the main drag of the neighborhood, with signs that said things like white silence equals violence and Black Lives Matter. And frankly, I've seen a lot of demonstrations in Baltimore, but never one like this in a neighborhood, in that particular neighborhood. And that just shows to me the potential for the current movement to become something bigger than ever in reaching out to people who may not have been involved before. These are folks who chose not to go downtown to the big demonstrations, but to show their neighborhood as part of the fight. And it shows you, and since Gasso just spoke, the diversity of people in Baltimore who are engaged at this point, and the need to reach out to people that haven't been reached out to, as Gasso was suggesting.
Just for one thing, let's look at some historical point. The Arab Spring in Egypt, they got the army to back the people in the movement there. And I'm a union person, and I'm thinking the police, their children and grandchildren are participating in these demonstrations too. And maybe we could reach out to the unions and say, hey, you're going against your own interest. I mean, it's a taboo thing, but say, hey, you're going against your interest because now your future officers or whoever coming in now have to wait an extra 5 years to retire. You have to, you have to pay more medical for your medical, et cetera. So, and why don't you join us in this struggle and protect us instead of these corporations, multi-corporations in Wall Street? And the politicians, voting is just one thing. The first thing I have to say is Wall Street. We have to do something about these corporations. And where I'm from, Long Island, I was very shocked in the sleepy suburbs that there were thousands of people that showed up to demonstrations, and we actually shut down the streets. And people in these sleepy suburbs actually came out to support us. So the tide is changing, and let's keep the tide up. But we have to see if we can reach out to these unions, these PBA unions, to try to get them on our side. And as far as explaining to the average person, we could always talk about capitalism, but let's talk to people that do not understand it in the plain language that they understand.
Yeah, it's a lot of things that we can cover in terms of the protests going on, and I'm just glad to see the media paying attention to it, because it's more than just it's a big deal. I mean, the way George Floyd died, but it's more than just that. It's the inequality, the lack of opportunities, the prison pipeline. We could go on, and we definitely need to bring everything to the light. Myself, working as a technician, I see it all the time. People, they just go for a full worker position or something like that just for a 10% raise. They don't think about the whole overall picture. And we definitely have to get that point across. And I'm glad for the protest to keep going, even if it's destructive. I just, old lady neighbor of mine had her window broken, but I was able to fix it for her yesterday. And I'm glad if that's what's going to take for people to pay attention to it. And I'm glad it's going to keep protesting. And if some people are choosing to kneel down, some people are actually doing looting, whatever it takes to get the point across, I'm with it.
Hi, I just wanted to first thank everyone for speaking who's spoken, especially hearing stories from workers that are organizing in different ways during the protests. It's really inspiring to hear. And I think we need more of that. To echo Jose's point at the very beginning, beyond these protests, we need to figure out ways to organize beyond that and use the momentum that's happening right now. I'm also calling from Baltimore, and it's been really inspiring to see these huge numbers of protests showing up and seeing bus drivers who are helping us block streets and chanting along with us, and hear, people from neighborhoods all around the city and all different neighborhoods coming out and showing their support, and sort of a lot of intersectional discussions which we've been having. So I think now is a time that people are engaging, and already I'm starting to see just on social media that engagement is starting to drop off. People are starting to go back to normal, which is our whole conversation today about what is normal and should we be going back to it. And so while we have this momentum, thinking of ways to organize in other ways. And I also really wanted to shout out to Gasso and her point about thinking about the prisons and the percentage of people who are in prisons and these workers in all different types of areas beyond bus drivers and city workers that are the brunt of all of these, the main brunt of all of the oppression that's happening. And I just wanted to share a tweet from someone in Baltimore who, just saying that whose husband is in prison unjustly right now, that correctional officers and wardens are retaliating against incarcerated people in agitation from the fact that we're protesting. And so we have to be really careful and conscientious about the effect that this has on people, and how to organize in ways that really hears those that are most oppressed first, and puts them in the positions to lead, because they know the issues more than anyone else. Thank you.
I'm glad gentleman brought up Egypt, because I think it's a very good example for people who paid attention, because we can see that protests are really important and very powerful, but quite often we can sort of misunderstand what's happening and actually believe, because those in power respond in a way that seems like they care and they're concerned. They have no choice. And it's the same with even when the army comes over to our side. We see in Egypt, the army came over to the people's side for a moment, and now we look today, and whose side is the army on? That's one of the reasons we have to understand what the real nature of the system is. We can't just treat the symptoms. Everybody in healthcare knows that. We have to get to the source of the disease. We are living in a polluted environment. I'm not just talking about the normal notion of pollution. The exploitation, attacks, violence of this society, the violence is absolutely necessary. How else would people accept our conditions? We have to have a certain number of people unemployed in this society. So are we going to tolerate that some have, some don't? We have more people incarcerated in this society than any other nation in the world. So we have to really get down to it. The gentleman before talked about people at work. We need to take those messages back. When we go to a demonstration, take them back, talk about it at dinner, talk about it with our neighbors, when we're fixing their windows, talk about it with our coworkers. That's where our power lies. We are in many ways complicit with this system because without us, this system can't run. And what we see, what Sultana talked about, is beginning to break with that complicity. She is a bus driver, not a fare collector. She wants to be able to move those people from place to place efficiently and effectively. People on BART who I know are on here have the same perspective. We are not there to serve them. And the message, yes, we don't have to use a whole lot of fancy words. It really is very simple. It's the most basic thing in the world. Those who do the work should make the decisions. That's what socialism is. That's what we need.
All I have to really say is that, you know, recently with the protest, I've seen that a lot of people have come out to support, which is an amazing thing. Because, you know, our movement from like socialism to communism thrives on other people. And, you know, the root of the world, the words socialism and communism come from a community or this like being social. And at the end of the day, all this like media attention and all these people coming out is important. But I think we always have to come to realize that not all these people joining have the best intentions in mind. Since a lot of the corporations, as we know, are doing this because they know that if they do not say anything now, like it's such a cultural phenomenon now that if they don't say anything, that they're gonna hurt the bottom line at the end of the day. So we have to remember that not everyone who may, you know, put up a black screen or puts like a hashtag Black Lives Matter post is with us at the end of the day. And with that fact, we also must remember that the movement is not just about the racism in the police force, but remembering what forces help, you know, fortify that racism and make sure that the police force is basically like a immovable block or just like a monolith. And that's like capitalism and the, like, you know, the corporatism that we, you know, constantly live in and day out. So we must always remember that like all these forces come together to make sure that our like minorities like and the poor are always constantly going to be at the bottom no matter what. So when people tell you in the movements or the protests that like, you know, it's not about like class and we can't bring in Marx into the protest or class into the protest, we have to remember it's not like that really. Because at the end of the day, like the thing that's keeping us down is capitalism. So we can't you know, we can't forget that. We're being held down by capitalism. That's it at the end of the day. We can't, you know, forget about that. Racism is helped by capitalism.
Who does the work of the society? You know, we always talk about these grand plans and these grand ideas that we got to have all mapped out. But what really, you know, it's mapped out. The workers of the society. How we going to run a hospital? We're going to ask the hospital workers. You know, how we going to run BART? We're going to ask the BART workers. You know, we're going to come together and run society because that's what we already do. We already run society. You know, we will just run it in a more democratic way. And, you know, and when we talk about, you know, organizing, it's always like in the abstract, like, oh, we got to go and organize. When you at work talking to your coworker and you talking about capitalism and all this stuff, that's organizing. And all you have to do is bring that outside of work. You know, get together with your coworkers, get together with your friends, start a little reading group. You know, that's organizing. You know, getting people mobilized, active, and thinking and walking the same way. That's organizing. It's not in the abstract. It's not some thing out there in the universe that, you know, you can't grab and do. You know, talking to your coworkers in the lunch break room, that's organizing. You know,
one thing I wanted to talk about, which really goes off the last point, is what Xavier was saying in the beginning is what is the next step after protesting? And what I really see as the next step, I have some time working as a union steward for the Transit Workers Union. And I really think the next step is striking, because we've heard from someone that we've heard from transit workers, we've heard from healthcare workers, we've heard from teachers. If all these workers suddenly were to strike, then it basically uproots the entire system, and they have and there's really no way to have the capitalist system operate. So if people are willing to strike, willing to picket, then it just puts that pressure that much stronger onto these forces. And I think one of the best focuses is really defunding the police and defunding the whole prison system, because the prison system is basically built to enslave people. And if we have kind of more of an idea of treatment over incarceration, instead of having people just cope with the problems, if you actually treat people, almost give them a full kind of 12-step of rehabilitation to kind of have actual psychological services coming to people instead of just basically controlling people by brutality. I think we're at a point where we do really need to be thinking about what that next step is. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank you all.
Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you. Like, it's awesome to see like so many people like all here right now. So crazy. So I represent Venus Press. There's a few of us that are involved in it, and we're just like a small Oakland DIY press. We do risograph printing, and we were thinking that it would be a really good idea because we've been hearing like a lot of people, like, you know, people that are like immunocompromised, or people that are like, you know, like everybody wants to be able to help, and not everybody knows how to approach it. So we're putting a field guide of direct action together. And I wanted to extend, because this book is kind of like an anonymous for the people by the people style book. If anybody has any ideas, like forms of direct action in any capacity, and ways that people should know how to get involved, or, you know, even have conversations or be better community members, you guys can totally please email us, and yeah, I'll post the email. If anybody's interested in adding anything or sharing any of their information, it'd be super great and helpful.
I'm really glad to be here. This is great. I'm really, really thrilled. I can't even, I've been waiting for this for years. I'm an activist. I've been an activist for like over 40 years. I've marched with the farm workers. I marched every march you could think of in the last 40 years. And what I want to say is this: it's really important for people to get together and begin to strategize, get into groups, break into groups. We used to do this. Like, one of the things we did was, say you got in a group with 10 people, but there's a lot of groups, but we take care of each other. Like, for example, if somebody's on the front lines, you want somebody behind you that's not going to be on the front lines to know exactly where you're at every time, all day, so that if you go into jail, somebody knows where you're at and how to help you. It's really important we take care of each other. And that's the biggest commitment we can make to each other. The second thing is, we need to strategize for 2 years, for 5 years. We need to make plans. We need to talk to older activists who have been in this for the last 30 or 40 years. How do you do it? Like Dolores Huerta is a friend of mine. She just turned 90. When she was in her 50s, the police almost killed her in San Francisco. They almost beat her to death. I don't know if you know about this, but now she is 90 years old and she's still an activist, and she has a foundation. But what I want to do is get together with people. Oh, got it, honey. I want to get together with people that know how to strategize, that know what the next step is, that can get together in groups and make plans for what we're going to do next. It's really important. So thank you. And I want to say one last thing. You know, the Zapatistas, they started with 3 people. So it's not a whole lot of people. We can do this, but we need to do it for the long term. Thank you.
All right. Hey, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. I kind of wanted to respond to a point that was made a little bit earlier. There's been a good amount of talk about defunding the police. And it's really an interesting concept, because I think if we sort of take a step back and ask ourselves, why do the police exist? You know, because then that sort of gives us a sense of how to understand an idea of defunding the police. If it were a matter of just public safety and, you know, do police really fulfill that role in society? And I think really not. Public safety means when people actually have a job, they can take care of their families, they have a roof over their head, people know each other in a community. But police don't fulfill that function, not at all. Police exist to serve the ruling class, the 1%, what have you. And the thing is, so long as that's the case, the ruling class will never voluntarily give up their front lines to really enforce their system. So I think it's, sort of important to keep this in mind. And, we do need to think seriously, what does public safety mean? What would it mean if the communities were actually empowered to solve their own problems, had the resources to really thrive, and could, take really control over this entire society? Because in fact, it's the 99%, it's the working class, as people have mentioned over and over, that creates 100% of the wealth in this society. If that is the case, why couldn't we invest in ourselves, invest in our kids, invest in our schools, invest in affordable housing, healthcare, drug treatment programs, you name it? So, just it's important to start to imagine what could a different kind of alternative look like. So thank you very much. And I wish you all a great rest of your day, and thank you.